Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today is January 21st and that means the new patch has just gone live for the living world. For those of you who have been a little bit out of the loop, well, quite a bit out of the loop I suppose, over the Christmas period, a lot of December and the start of January here, we actually didn't have any living world updates. ArenaNet have been on break to really polish and refine the next 4 living world updates, of which the first one just came out, which are going to be concluding the Scarlet story. So really they've kind of gone all in on these next few updates to finish everything off in a nice way and get people invested. If you've been following my channel a lot recently, you'll know my opinions on the living story, that actually I feel the gameplay is pretty solid a lot of the time. I feel that the rewards are pretty solid a lot of the time, and I really like the pace of the releases that the living world offers. However, I think the story, you know, the living story, the actual story elements of this new system ArenaNet are trying to adopt for their MMO, I think is really lackluster. I think people aren't invested in the story. They're not as invested as they should be. They don't like the villain that's currently going on, and it's not necessarily because of Scarlet as a character. It's just because the living world has been really bad at getting us invested. This new patch is kind of changing my opinion a little bit on that topic. I think that extra time that they've spent on the patch has been really interesting to see how they've managed to focus on a new living story instance that they've added that feels a lot like personal story stuff when the game launched. So in this video, I want to sum up to you guys everything that happened with the story, what I think about it, and hopefully get us all a little bit more invested. And in future videos, I will talk more mechanically about the updates. Okay, so let me lay it on the line for you all right now. This update includes 2 new bosses that have been added to the game. Both of them are very difficult to defeat. One of them is a giant puppet that's come from like a mysterious spaceship in the sky above Lornar's Pass, and the other one is a giant 3-headed worm located in Bloodtide Coast. They're both difficult bosses, but the really difficult one is the worm, and I will be talking specifically about how to defeat that worm and hopefully putting a lot more information about it on videos to follow. Currently I haven't played too much of that stuff. In addition to the 2 bosses that have been added, they also seem to have added some kind of like a secret instance to the game, and they've added a story instance too, where you get to interact with a lot of the characters, pretty much all of the characters actually, that we've come to know over the living world so far, plus a new one, funnily enough, plus some minor characters too, and really actually get interested in a lot of the backstories and lives of these characters, which is what I feel is so important. Before we get into that though, I'll just give you guys some of the actual patch notes that I found most interesting. ArenaNet basically released 2 documents, shall we say. One of them's on their official website where they've got, you know, a load of flavor text explaining the patch and screenshots of some of the new gear you can get for defeating the bosses. And then obviously over on the wiki, they've got more decisive patch notes there too. So ArenaNet's description of the patch is that for weeks, mysterious probes have been thrumming ominously all across Tyria. Now the Vigil has ordered a trio of crusaders to investigate 3 mysterious new probes that have been sighted in Bloodtide Coast. Meanwhile, the Priory in Lornar's Pass has observed Scarlet Briar's watchwork minions streaming into their region. What's the connection between these events, and what exactly is Scarlet up to? And then it goes on to describe that there is a new boss, the Marionette weapon test, which is like a crazy weird encounter I'll add to you guys. And that comes with pretty much an entire achievement category almost dedicated to it. So as with all these living world patches, there's a new whole meta achievement that you can go for. There's a bunch of stuff there. As far as I can see, none of that in the meta achievement has anything to do with the triple-headed worm that you can find in Bloodtide Coast, or if there is, there's very few achievements associated with it. The worm itself also has its own new achievement category, just like when Gw2 was released. If you guys remember when that boss came out, it had its own thing in the boss section, and then it also had a section in the living world. So the patch notes also have this kind of cryptic description of something that's changed, where they explain that some of the UI on the right hand side of the screen has been refined or polished somehow. That's actually really significant. So what happens when you first log in game, usually for living world patches, is you'll get a mail of some sort from some character saying, hey, stuff is going down in this map, why don't you go check it out? And then it's up to you to just like look at your map for those little golden starbursts quests and figure it all out on your own. It's actually a lot easier to do living world stuff now because they've completely changed the way that it gives you information in the top right hand corner of your screen. It used to be there'd just be like some tiny bit of flavor text there, like, oh, Winter's Day has arrived in Lion's Arch. Well, now it gives you like very specific, almost quest marker like objectives. So when you first log in, you'll get the mail and you can read it, and you'll actually have an objective up in the top right hand corner that says, hey, go to Lornar's Pass. And if you click that line of text that says go to Lornar's Pass, it will actually open the map for you and show you exactly what waypoint and where you need to go with a bit of description. Do you guys remember like when you were leveling up in Guild Wars 2 and you found those scout characters that you could speak to, and then they'd give you an overview of an area and tell you why you were going there? It's pretty much exactly the same thing now, but for the living world. Up in the top right hand corner, you've always got like a bullet point that says, hey, this is what you should do next. It's like the next step in your quest if this was a traditional quest. And the best thing about it is it actually continuously updates as you play through the content. So for example, I log in the game at the start, and this is the footage in the background. You see I'm in Lion's Arch, and then when I get to Lornar's Pass, that changes to now say, oh, okay, you found where you need to go. The boss is going to spawn in 5 minutes. And then once the boss does spawn, it turns into this list of information about the different mechanics of the fight. So let's talk about the fight very briefly here. I'm going to do another video later specifically about this boss and about the triple-headed worm, because they're complicated fights. You don't actually have to defeat the Marionette, though the living story is going to say that you have to go there first. You don't have to defeat it to progress the story, you just need to like participate in the fight. Basically, it exists in open world Lornar's Pass. It's like a dynamic event like Jawmag or the Fire Elemental or any other, and it will spawn after a certain period of time, and there's loads of really complicated things coming. I actually don't think ArenaNet did a very good job at teaching the players how to participate smartly in the fight. I was trying to be incredibly attentive to everything that was going on, and it still pretty much just culminated in me running around zerging and killing lots and lots and lots of enemies. But basically, you fight lots of enemies in lanes, you can build siege up to defend, there seem to be repair kits in the area, and then eventually you get teleported into these platforms where you fight a bunch of champions, and if you kill them all, I think you manage to beat the boss. Either way, I'm pretty sure the footage you're seeing there is of one of the first times this guy ever spawned. I'm pretty sure I was in an overflow, and we didn't beat him in the end. I got like 1 achievement out of many in that meta category, but that's a bit of a taste of the fight, and I'll have more information for you guys very soon about how to do it easily once there's some guides I can look at myself and I can play it a few more times and learn about it. But regardless of what your experience in the actual fight was, the game's going to direct you back to Lion's Arch. Again, you can click this thing, it will tell you exactly where your next story instance is. And this time, instead of just being in the open world for Lornar's Pass, you can now enter an instance within Lion's Arch. This was very, very cool. And to me, actually, as this patch came out, one of the things I was most excited about was the boss fights. But for now, I think what they demonstrated they can do with the living world in this little instance was a lot more exciting to me. See, in this instance, you get to meet pretty much every character that's been in the living world so far. And I believe the idea of it is to keep everybody caught up, really explain to everyone what's going on with the world, and then expand a little bit more on the backstory of some of the characters. First of all, you're going to get backstory from Scarlet. As soon as you load in, there's this Dermond Priory scholar stood in front of you saying that the Dermond Priory is now trying to distribute as much information as they can about Scarlet to the masses of Tyria. And you can just keep clicking through all these dialogue boxes with this character where she explains pretty much everything we already knew about Scarlet if you were really keeping up with the lore. So as many of you guys know, there was a story blog post that went up some months ago now that explained in really nice detail who Scarlet was and her life from the moment she was born until the moment she sort of cracked and became Scarlet Briar as we now know her, because that's not her original name. And it was told in a really beautiful and nice way, and it was a fascinating story to read on the blog post, but many people missed out on it. However, now you can kind of get the gist of that story actually in-game by speaking to this scholar. It's nowhere near the experience it would be if you actually read the story that was on the blog, but at least it's something. I also think it's a bit of a cop-out excuse that we get all this vital exposition on the main villain from a random scholar that they decide to add. They're like, oh, we need to teach people about Scarlet. Okay, we'll add this random scholar, and then we'll give this random excuse that the Dermond Priory knows all this stuff about Scarlet, and there we go, that's our answer. But hey, better than nothing. I'm not going to complain too much. That's a minor thing as an aside, though, to the entire story instance. I should also add as well that currently dropping throughout the world are these collectible items where once you've called ciphers, or cipher decoders, I believe. But once you find 25 of them, you double-click them, and you can actually get pages from Scarlet's journal, which again is more stuff to do with her backstory. I haven't read all of those journal pages yet. I just know about their existence. So again, that sort of supplements the lameness of this. But the more the better, I say. So I'm not going to say they shouldn't have added it at all. What I'll do, guys, is I'll just sum up everything that happens with the story as quickly as possible. But basically, there's this whole thing where Rytlock and Rox meet up for the first time in a really long time. The story so far is that Rox has wanted to be a member of Rytlock's warband, the Stone Warband, and Rytlock sent her off on a mission to take out Gw2, and Rox's job was to bring Rytlock to Gw2's tail. And supposedly she'd been lugging it around with her ever since that happened, but she hadn't got into contact with Rytlock since. Well, now they meet for the first time in Lion's Arch since all that time, and Rytlock says, oh, did you manage to defeat Gw2? And Rox says, yeah, well, I've been dragging this tail around constantly. And then Rytlock says, oh, don't worry about it, I don't need to see the tail. And actually kind of seems to let Rox down a little. But then Rytlock turns around and says, I've got a proposition for you. You can absolutely be in my warband 100%, I promise you, if you kill Scarlet. So it seems like a bit of a cop-out-y reason to have Rox now be involved very heavily in the actual Scarlet drama. I mean, Rox has just by chance been about when Scarlet's been doing stuff lately. Now there's a real reason for her to be involved with the Scarlet stuff. Rytlock's concerned somehow about Scarlet, and so there we go. He wants Rox to kill her. Rox does that, and then she gets in the warband. At the same time, though, Rytlock's kind of an ass to her, and I think that what they're trying to do is set up that Rox should begin to doubt whether she wants to be in the warband. The reason why I say this is because as soon as that conversation is over, Bram walks in on the scene, and these two, it had actually already been hinted at in a previous update, these two seem to have a little bit of a fight, a little bit of an argument about the fact that Rox is so intent on getting in this warband. Bram is basically saying, hey, look, we've been doing all this cool stuff together. Why do you want to go off and be in this warband? You're just going to be separated from us. You're going to always have these duties to do. We're never going to be able to see each other again. Why do you care so much about it? Isn't this something cool we've got going on here? And Rox's only response is that it's a char thing, and she seems to doubt herself somehow. I did mention in a previous patch video that I did that this was already being set up. If you guys remember, there was a hint at it at the Winter's Day stuff when it originally came out, and it seems like this story is developing even further. This is actually what excites me. It may seem like a small trivial thing to a lot of you, but I think if we're ever going to care about the living world, we have to start caring about these characters and the actual things that are going through their minds and what motivates them and what hurts them. This is actually important, and by seeing this conversation, by being included in this a little bit more, I do care a bit more about Rox and Bram, and who knows, after 3-4 more patches as this develops further, I've got to say I'd probably be more invested in seeing a storyline like that have a conclusion than, you know, them randomly throwing an Elder Dragon at us or some new big villain somehow. So I do think it's important, you know, things that the community starts to take sides on. Oh, well, I agree with Rox, I agree with Bram. We're maybe not at that point just yet, but I think it's really important that they're actually starting to focus on this kind of stuff. I want to care about the characters, so let them be characters. It's the kind of quantity I was looking for. But they do something quite cool. As soon as Bram walks off, if you then follow Bram, Bram gets himself into another conversation. Now, you guys might not see it when you're originally playing the Marionette fight, but a lot of these characters are participating in that battle. Bram's at the battle, Rox is at the battle, and so is a new character. I believe her name is Timey. I think that's how you say her name. She's an Asura progeny. This is a new character to the Living Story. She's only appeared in this patch as far as I'm aware. She's got an entirely new model. Basically, she's a golem, and she's just this little baby Asura that stands on its shoulders. And she's fascinated. She's studying at the College of Synergetics in Ratasum, and you can learn all this in-game. And she's fascinated by Scarlet. She comes across very Asura, and she's like, yeah, Scarlet's evil, but also I could learn so much from her, so she really interests me. Not quite sure what the motivation on Timey is, or what her angle is, or whether she's maybe an agent of evil right now, but I think we're meant to be sort of looking at her scrupulously. She is, at the end of the day, though, just a little girl, Asura, so maybe we shouldn't look too closely at her. And she has quite a cute little dialogue with Bram. You see, after Bram has this argument with Rox, he walks off, and all of a sudden there's just this progeny here. And randomly they just start talking to one another, and it's like, okay, we'll roll with it. And it seems that Timey needs to go back to Ratasum. She was never really meant to have left. And all of a sudden Logan comes out of the blue, and we have these three very odd characters having this dialogue where basically Logan's saying who's meant to be responsible for this little girl, and it all gets pinned on Bram somehow. Bram, who's got other stuff in his mind, who doesn't care at all, now gets lumped with this girl. and he's convinced that he has to go and take her back to her home in Ratassoum. Like, what a cool idea. So all of a sudden there's like this other new story going on. You know, maybe Rox and Bram are going to get split up in the end, and then Bram's going to be like, okay, well, I've got another dynamic duo thing going on now. This time not with a Char, instead it's with this tiny Asura and her massive golem. So they seem to be brewing another story there. Kind of interesting. It piqued my curiosity straight away, and I'm actually a little bit excited to see how it goes from here, which again is something far, far, far further ahead than what we saw when the Living World was originally being released. Logan walks away from this conversation, and if you follow Logan ends up having a conversation with Marjorie. Marjorie is with Lady Kasmeer. They're sat on the beach at Lion's Arch. They're sort of huddled together. It's quite cute, really, looking out at the ocean, and Logan calls Marjorie over. They don't have too much to say that's like super important beyond just the fact that it's cool to see these guys interacting with one another. Both of these people from Divinity's Reach. You know, when we first met Marjorie, Logan was pretty much there in the conversation at the same time, so it was cool to see that sort of furthered on a bit. But Marjorie asks Logan whether he knows who E is. Again, another hint of this E character. Logan says he's got no idea, and Marjorie says, okay, she's just sort of eliminating suspects, I suppose, or names from a list in her mind as to who E really could be. It's nice to see again that there's another hint at E. They don't reveal their hand too early. I feel like E is one of those mysteries. They need to leave it really late before they give that answer to us. I want that sort of hanging over our heads for a long time. And I know a lot of people don't like that at the moment. They've been hanging too much over our heads, but I think E works well at the moment, being hung over our heads. And it was cool to see him mentioned anyway. And again, if you follow one of these characters after their small conversation, this time Marjorie goes back to Kasmeer, and these two have a conversation where Kasmeer explains like a whole ton of her backstory. It's kind of hard to swallow, honestly, that they've never talked about this before. Marjorie and Kasmeer have been like flirting non-stop, acting like they've known each other for years, and then all of a sudden there's this random out of the blue conversation on a beach about everything terrible that's ever happened to Kasmeer. But still, it's nice to get her backstory, and that actually is. The idea is Kasmeer, she's Lady Kasmeer, right? She actually lost all of her money, all of her possessions, everything she'd ever known before she came to work for Marjorie. Turns out Lady Kasmeer has a brother named Kyle. Who is Kyle? Who knows? I did actually wiki Kyle after I heard this conversation. There is a human called Kyle in the game, but he's like stationed in Ebonhawk and he's dealing with the peace treaty stuff. I'm pretty sure it can't be the same character. But basically, her brother in this backstory was a gambler and just an all-round good-for-nothing who got himself in massive amounts of debt. So Kasmeer's father spent all of his money and put himself into debt, bailing his son out. And then, as a result of Lady Kasmeer's father putting himself in loads of debt, he had everything taken away from him, and he was thrown in jail by the Ministry Guard. And Lady Kasmeer has not seen her father since, supposedly. And there was a little bit of information about her staff as well. There were some interesting tidbits about how she was practicing staff abilities, which I always quite like. I like insights into the way magic works and is learned in this universe. That's always quite cool. And there's even a bit of a story about the fact that she was offered one thing she could take from the house by, like, the repo men that she could keep. And she could have picked anything, any priceless thing, but instead she just chose to take a teddy bear that her father had once bought her. And then she lost the teddy bear somehow as well at some point. So there's a lot of backstory they just gave us about Lady Kasmeer. I'm wondering if that ties into the E story somehow. Like, maybe these are candidates they're setting up for who E could be. Is E her father? Perhaps, somehow. Or is maybe E her brother, Kyle? Who knows? But they gave us this information. Hopefully it'll be relevant at some point. I quite liked it. I found it a bit hard to swallow that suddenly it was just all thrown out there like that. And she was, like, the voice actress was crying as she read it. And I'm like, wow, you've just thrown this all on so quickly. I think maybe it could have been pieced out a little bit more. But that's beside the point. The fact that they're giving us real quantity with regards to what these characters have to say, backstories, motivations, ambitions. This is good. This is actually something that's getting me kind of excited. So that was by and large what the mini instance had to offer. You guys might also remember there's a couple of Quaggons who were displaced from their homes during all the stuff that happened in Keswick's Hills. They're actually there out in the instance as well, talking about how they see the silver lining and that they found love. And that's quite nice, but I guess it exists maybe as a bit of a side to the rest of the stuff that was going on in the personal instance. So that's mostly what I wanted to talk to you guys in this video about for today. I found this stuff all very interesting. At the end of the day, this is the main story stuff that we're really going to have to keep our eye on, and hopefully we get just as much next patch, just as much the patch after that. I still feel like we're still a bit shy of where I'd really like the living story to be in terms of the characters and what we learn about them every 2 weeks. You know, I feel like if we have just a little bit more, we're definitely close a bit. If we have a bit more, people will be really genuinely starting to get excited about what happens every 2 weeks, as long as things keep moving on with the characters, and there are enough characters to, you know, pad it out. So once you've done all of this stuff, you've spoken to all these characters, your bullet point keeps changing and changing and changing. Eventually, you will find out that it turns out Scarlet's main base, she'd already demonstrated she had that base in Caledon Forest, of course, and she seems to have had various bases all over the place. But apparently the main base, who knew she had one, is located underneath the Dermond Priory, which is a very interesting location to site one, but I guess it sort of makes sense with who Scarlet is. And it's like a hidden instance. You can actually go there right now. If you guys remember the secret Aetherblade hideout and the not-so-secret jumping puzzle, these were places that had like holographic technology that projected fake walls that you, the player, could just walk through if you found out where the wall was. There's actually another one of these which is hiding where Scarlet's base is, and you can find it in the caves beneath the Dermond Priory. Again, it's in the footage in the background. Problem is, there's a giant metal door that's blocking our way. There's a bunch of drops that are coming from this patch, that allow you to unlock ciphers, read ciphers, and there's a bunch more drops that allow you to create a power core that I believe gets you into the door. This is stuff I haven't done yet. The patch is so expansive. I want to be able to put this out for you guys, talk about all the story stuff today, and we'll look at that secret instance, more detailed information about the mega bosses. There'll probably be quite a few videos on the worms if they're difficult enough and engaging enough. You know, maybe I can put some videos out of us actually in TeamSpeak and, you know, doing it all raid style. Could be interesting, but that stuff will have to follow. For this one, though, that's basically everything I have to say. I would love to hear what you guys thought of that story instance. Am I blowing smoke out of my ass, or was it genuinely a little bit better? I think the main question on my mind is, okay, this was a little bit up to the standard of what I want. If it was like this every 2 weeks, this would be pretty cool, but they had to take like a month to do this. You know, they had to go on a big break. Is there any way they can actually do this every single time? 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, keep pushing it and keep it going in interesting directions. Can they do that? Or are people going to get bored of it? Or was it still, you know, nowhere near enough? Were you one of those people that just went in the instance and you couldn't be bothered to stand about waiting for the characters to have their conversations? You just flicked through all the text and then went on about your day? Because I would argue, by the way, if you are a player that's doing that, maybe you're never going to enjoy the story anyway, because the buck does have to stop somewhere. You can't blame the devs constantly if you're willing to put no effort in yourself. So it's interesting. We'll see. I'd love to hear what you guys thought about the instance. Anyway, that's it. Thanks very much, guys. And I will see you tomorrow, absolutely, for more information about the new patch. I'll see you there.